So Steve McKenzie, Building Safety Face, is one of the best known Twitter commentators and experts probably in the UK on building safety. So welcome, good to see you again.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, Matt, and thanks to the Building Safety Register for having my views today on this building safety crisis.
No problem, no problem. And I think we probably spend far too much time than is healthy talking to each other anyway, but most of it isn't recorded, thankfully. So I thought it was a really good idea to try and capture some of our crazy and less crazy thoughts in terms of the conversations we have about how, not so much how we got into this mess, but how do we get out of this mess as a country. And just before we started recording, we were having a bit of a chat about the need to risk rank buildings and understand where these buildings are and quality of data and all that sort of stuff. So we'll come back to that in a second. But first of all, for anyone that doesn't know you very well, could you just give us a very quick overview of who you are and how you got into this business and what you spend your days doing, helping people around building safety and fire safety?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I come from a traditional construction background through an apprenticeship on the tools, went back to college and university, got the academic qualifications, got the professional qualifications, and it was this really unusual subject called fire dynamics that I did in building control, which challenged me more than any other subject that I've ever studied. So therefore, I went on to do 4 years academic research with a fire engineering team at Glasgow Cali. I set up my own research team at Robert Gordon University. I've lectured both sides of the Atlantic, both in academia and at formal conferences and conventions and such like. I've worked on international guides for fire risk assessment. I've run national fire risk workshops with various esteemed speakers from the likes of ARUP, BRE, MHCLG, the Scottish Exec, UK Fire Services. I sit on a lot of committees. I give a lot of commentary over the years, but predominantly it's behind the scenes. It's behind the scenes work. It's with business to business groups. It's with regulators and policy making groups. We've even worked on and informed the National Research Strategy for Scotland, because I noticed that under devolved powers, we were still using the central government research strategy when we really needed our own in Scotland. The timing was right, so we took the proposals to HMI Fire Inspectorate, the Fire Brigade Union, Chief Fire Officers, the Scottish Exec, at the time the Scottish Government, Justice Department, Fire Policy Divisions. And then we can walk through a number of other campaigns on research, fire strategy, fire safety management. And then I moved out of academia into pure consultancy, which brought me into understand how we use research and academic tools and how we use those in the real world. And this was a couple of years after the regulatory reform fire safety order, but I'd already been looking at risk assessment and risk management. How do we do that in the real world? What's the problems? What's the issues? What affects the selecting models? Where's the gaps in data? How realistic is probabilistic or quantitative risk assessment? Well, we can't use it. It's always vouched that we use quantitative risk assessment in defence and nuclear sector. Well, I've now worked in both on the country's nuclear deterrent, and the best we can achieve is a quasi-probabilistic method, a quasi-number-based system, because we've got massive gaps in the data. When we try and apply these pedagogies and philosophies to buildings, it starts breaking down. And then what we see is the dumbing down of risk assessment methods, inadequate government policy, legislation, regulation, poor control over construction quality, etc. And then Grenfell happened. We all know about the issues, and it's very well documented, and Grenfell wasn't unprecedented. The Grenfell inquiry isn't unprecedented because we had a previous House of Commons inquiry into external fire spread following the 1999 Garrett Court fire, and then following the coroner's reports to government following Lacanal. So, and then there's fires on an international basis. So we understand the issues. We understand the car crash that has led to Grenfell being the epicenter of this building safety crisis. And we can actually map out the waves of the shocks and stressors. We've repeatedly called in government for an effective civil contingency response, and then second and third wave civil contingency response is government finally listens to the independent experts saying the issues is bigger than ACM, it's bigger than cladding, it's bigger than fire alarms, it's the whole premise of our system. So what we've been doing over the past 3.5 years is helping guide media with strong, robust technical expertise as the Grenfell incident and life loss event, where we lost 72 lost souls, an impacted community which is now radiated out in shocks and stressors that's affecting hundreds and now thousands and now millions of families.
So Steve, bearing in mind your CV, your background, your experience in these different industries, your deep understanding of fire and risk management, when Grenfell happened, why wasn't your phone red hot from inbound calls from the Ministry of Housing or from the Home Office to say, Steve, we need you to help us. We're in a bind here. We need the brightest minds to help us. Are you available tomorrow? Talk us through what happened in the sort of the immediate aftermath and why that doesn't appear to have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens when we look at the Grenfell case, for me, it's waking up in the night in a really bad habit of checking news feeds because I work globally. I don't work just in fire, I work in security, I work in counter-terrorism, I work in major incidents and disasters. So we're never truly off the clock. I seen it 2:05 and immediately went, that could be a bad one. And that's a reaction that everybody had. We knew, we thought, we prayed it wouldn't be, but we knew it had potential to be a catastrophic event. So the first thing for me is, I know I won't get any emergency services contacts or any emergency planners. Everybody will be focused on the initial incident response. But I did also know that there'd be a void in information and a clamour from the news agencies. And not all of the respondents dialing into news desks will have a technical or a professional background or a knowledge base. So what I did was, I wouldn't normally do this because I work under security aspects, I work under national security, and I work on sensitive projects. But I knew the potential of this one was we needed expertise. So I contacted the news desks, and then I was invited to attend Live Point with Sky News, and then it was Sky News, ITV, BBC, ITN, Al Jazeera, all the press agencies. And for the next couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years now, what we've done is we've responded to Grenfell, other fire incidents in the UK and across the world, and trying to give very sound, practical and understandable technical expertise and look at the wider issues. Then what we've done after that, we have spoken at on expert panels. There was a major convention the week after Grenfell at FireX at the London Excel. And because all the government and all the emergency services speakers dropped out, I offered to stand in. And I went onto the Grenfell expert panel and we spoke at length, and it was televised, probably the first one ever. It was televised, not only on a national, but an international basis. So the pressure's on. Then we're following the reports from the sector, and we're building up a picture of what's happened at Grenfell. And the alarm bells are going off very, very quickly. Within a matter of hours, a matter of days, a matter of weeks, we have understood that we have got a major failure of regulation and enforcement that has led to a significant life loss event, and we have other buildings in danger. So what we're doing is we are then emailing number 10 Downing Street, the Mayor of London, and select MPs and ministers. And every single time it's come back and said, thank you very much. We have passed it on to our government expert group, chaired by Sir Ken Knight. But in the sector, we are concerned that some of the individuals on this expert group have actually created the problem. And we've impressed upon government the alternatives to that expert group, how to get transparency, how to bring in international expertise, which was actually adopted by the Scottish Parliament. They had a fully transparent process. It was a ministerial working group. It had independent expertise that helped create the systems which were implemented, but it had a completely impartial expert panel, not only of UK but international experts. And everything is in the public domain, whereas the central government strategy was everything's behind closed doors. And we don't understand that.
It does seem to me, and I'm a real big believer in diversity of everything, diversity and inclusion, and including diversity of opinion and diversity of experience and background. And to my mind, if I was running that, I would want to surround myself with the best people I possibly could, with the most diversity of, the greatest diversity of opinion and experience, and also understand that by just having the same people that preceded the incident involved in the post-incident follow-up, there is actually an incentive, potentially, not saying that it's happened, but a potential incentive to cover tracks. And I'm wondering perhaps maybe with your approach, whether because you weren't involved in the prelims to this, that whether that might be perceived as a threat to other people, and whether it's much easier just to keep everybody close, that was involved. And, and I'd still say 3.5 years later, my experience is the door is firmly bolted shut when it comes to trying to interact with government on any of these subjects. It's you're either very much in the club, in which case you don't go public, or you're outside. I haven't seen the evidence of anybody being brought into the fold in the last 2 or 3 years.
I think what I can see is the likes of FireX. I was on the initial expert panel, and I was supposed to chair the final expert panel on Grenfell and close out the FireX conference. But there was deep upset within the industry that essentially was shut down, and the final session was cancelled. That was incredibly disappointing, because what I said is, and the response I got was, we've said everything there is to say on Grenfell. And my reaction was one of disbelief. I've lost family members in a gas explosion. This is sector leadership saying we've said all there is to say about the greatest life loss fire event since World War II. So what I countered with was like, okay, if you don't want me to chair it, get someone else, but please include me on the panel, for consistency. If you don't want to discuss Grenfell anymore, then could we discuss how we move forward? What are the solutions to this crisis from the entire fire sector? Like we've got them all in London this week. Can we grab the 5 key priorities and take that back to UK government? Take that back to number 10 Downing Street by Friday. The 5 key priorities from the sector. And absolutely, we were just shut down. And I've got the email correspondence, incredibly disappointed in the sector.
It does seem that the urgency, or the lack of urgency, this inertia with government that, I came into this sort of government discussion in November 2018, so just over 2 years ago. So a bit later than you. I didn't attend Grenfell, and it wasn't appropriate, and I didn't feel that I was in the right space to do it at the time. But that being said, I was expecting responses that would have been, well, thank you for raising that point, but we're 9 months into doing what you're talking about, so you're too late. And what I found very quickly was that the things that I just had taken as givens, that this would be a part of the government crisis response, they hadn't started, but they hadn't even thought about, or weren't willing to say that they'd thought about. And it just seems that the conversations we have, that you sort of think, we're in a crisis situation, time is of the essence, people's lives are at risk, we might not get everything right, but we need to take action. We seem to have this governmental kind of slow time, considered, laborious response that ultimately gets to the point that we're talking about, but 4 years after we've had the conversation. And it seems to me that with the threat level or the risk level that we've got, and what it's doing to whether it's life safety or whether it's emotional safety or psychological and financial, on residents, is that we haven't got the time for that slow process, and we've got to make some decisions, we've got to take some action. And I think, to me, that's one of the most frustrating points with all of this, is that the bleeding obvious is not accepted in any kind of quick time. And then you just end up with this perpetual wait to get to the point where some money drips out or a decision gets made. Or we rest on, one today was, keeping it topical, was the need that effectively from Stephen Greenhouse, the Building Safety Minister, that effectively when new legislation comes in, everything's going to be okay. We can't do anything at the moment because we don't have the right legislation. And and I know, we have CDM regs, we have the regulatory reform via safety order, we've got the Health and Safety at Work Act. There are plenty of levers to be pulled to affect change, but it seems that they're unwilling to pull them for whatever reason. I don't know what your take is on that, but talk us through what you think, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could run workshops, we could run seminars, we could run conferences on this and subdivide all the issues. And I think moving forward with what we know of the government response was there was too much behind closed doors. They didn't manage the crisis communications. They didn't communicate what was happening on the ground with Grenfell, what was happening behind the scenes with the wider issues. We know for a fact that government thought it was just a couple of buildings. They convened the Saturday after Grenfell, which occurred on the Wednesday, of course. They convened their expert group. Excuse me. They convened their expert group, and then it started becoming transparent how big the problem was starting to get. Then we had the BRE doing these tests, and the government excruciating. It's 10 buildings, it's 50, it's 100, now it's 457 with ACM, over 3,000 with non-ACM, and the numbers are getting bigger. Bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people getting caught up with this. So there is a degree of self-preservation by government and its experts to not opening Pandora's box and floodgates to state aid, a mass product recall, and civil contingency responses. The government keeps batting it back to saying our legislation and guidance was fine, everyone else got it wrong. So there isn't ownership of blame. It's only now with the new minister, Team Stephen, as his Twitter handle goes, it's the new minister, he's only now starting to apologise. They're now starting to take ownership of it. But we've had too many promises from two prime ministers now, successive MHCLG, Home Office and housing ministers, that there's a massive credibility gap and there's an uphill battle. They have lost transparency, they've lost the crisis response, they've lost the public engagement, and now it's too big for them. It's one of the biggest product recall disasters of our time. It could potentially surpass that of asbestosis, which is still to this day being treated, identified, and resolved in buildings. This is the worst case scenario, that cladding and combustibles and compartmentation and all the other issues carries on for decades to come. And people are getting caught up as collateral damage in this through financial stressors, bankruptcy, mental health stressors, and suicide. That is wrong. This incident will be studied for decades to come by the fire sector, communications, political researchers from civil contingency and crisis response. This is about as ineffective a response as I've seen since Hurricane Katrina, and all the criticism that FEMA had about their delayed civil contingency response and the impact and the loss of life as a result. Therefore, government is in a rock and a hard place. The sector's response is behind closed doors. The Hackett review, we didn't know who was on the subgroups. We didn't know who represented what interests. We didn't see any transparency. Come to think of it, name the National Fire Safety Charity in the UK. Who is the National Fire Safety Charity in the UK that is supported by public funds, but doesn't represent a commercial or a membership basis. They're either professional bodies, trade associations. There's very few, if any, national fire safety professional bodies. If I want gas safety, I go to Gas Safe. I go to the Gas Safety Trust. Where is the equivalent for fire safety? There isn't one. We don't even have a 3-digit non-emergency number for the fire service. So millions of impacted residents can phone up and get advice, say, I've got Wake and Watch, I'm in building X. Is my family safe? Do I need to pack up and leave? We've got weak enforcement, we've got weak response, we've got a lot of rearguard action. We've even seen some of the expert group to the Common Select Committee, the Government Select Committee, the check and balance, saying, yes, we'd like to divulge that, but we need to hide behind commercial non-disclosure agreements, including non-disclosures with government. That's perverse. We've got core organisations helping set the standards, write the guidance, advise government, represent the UK on national and international standards committees, doing follow-up horizon scanning of large fires on a global scale, and doing selected fire investigations in the UK, doing all the post-Grenfell testing. If I was a solicitor or legal counsel, and I'm Criminal Evidence Act trained and accredited by the NHS and by the UK government, I would shred that impartiality.
And it does seem, if we not seem it is. If we look at the Hackett Review, for example, which we've talked about it a lot, but there are a lot of, I think there are a lot of good ideas in the Hackett Review, but it does almost seem to me as being a sort of an academic exercise that was produced without the context of reality, if you like, next door to it, saying, well, okay, how bad is this? Can we implement these points? If we were to implement them, what would that do? Is it realistic? So I think in terms of, it's almost taken a theoretical set of ideals and said, okay, well, we're going to do that. We're going to commit to it without actually thinking through or understanding the years and years that would take, and saying, okay, running alongside that, we need a down and dirty tactical plan to make sure that people are safe in their homes quickly. Because now, 3.5+ years post Grenfell, I'm still getting calls from people that are saying, I'm in a private block, it's 12 stories and it's got ACM cladding and we haven't started yet.
Yeah.
And what if we're turning around and saying, this ACM cladding, for example, is what contributed X% to the deaths of 72 people in Kensington, and we've got to get this all off buildings straight away. Why the hell is it still there? And that particular block is all about an argument over funding. And it's to do with, as I understand it, other elements that need to be done simultaneously with that facade that aren't included within the Building Safety Fund or the ACM fund as it was. And there's a standoff over payments, I think. We can't really get to the bottom of why. But the fact of the matter is there are still people living in those homes that are hearing repeatedly, this is the most dangerous type of cladding, and they live in buildings with, in inverted commas, the most dangerous type of... Now, we can have a debate whether it is the most dangerous type of cladding, and there's lots of other elements holistically, but from a messaging perspective, for a relatively small number of buildings with ACM, they're still clad with ACM. 3.5 years plus after the largest loss of life outside of wartime in this country. So I think the question has got to be, cutting aside all of we've got wonderful new legislation coming and biggest reform of legislation in 40 years, question to Ministry of Housing, Chris Pincher, Robert Jenrick, Stephen Greenhalgh is, how have you let this happen? That to me is the issue we need to understand and move on from.
Yeah, I mean, I think normally when we see a disaster response or a major incident response, we normally need to give support and expertise for like 6 months to maybe 12 months. 2 years at the outside, like say 9/11, the NIST reports and the research and the forensic analysis of that major incident, or Hurricane Katrina or any number of other instances. What we've seen with Grenfell is we've never got past the issues, and we don't know the extent of the issues. We don't know how many high-rise. We don't know how many with ACM. We don't know how many with non-ACM. The government was late to test non-ACM, despite people before and after Grenfell, including this expert, saying you need to test all cladding systems. And they finally yielded and they tested notional cladding systems like each high-pressure laminates, but they left out expanded polystyrene render systems, which the Australian government's now tested. And they've said it's really bad and it's as bad as ACM. So the government's been caught out. So independent experts like myself, we're trying to help everybody get up to speed. We're trying to represent the public interest. We have really put our careers on the line. And at times we've been blocked and shunned and trolled and trashed by our own sector. And it's soul destroying. And the only thing that keeps us going is we get another resident call, another family. And these are families that are scared. They're scared about their safety. They're scared about their kids. They're in mental health stress. They've got no government agency to turn to. The independent advisory group lease is just ineffective. And we've got all these regulators, building control, health and safety exec, fire authorities and fire service. And who's given the day-to-day advice? Everybody's been badly let down by this. And they're talking about joint inspection teams. Well, even they couldn't get approval through government. They couldn't get insurance because there was concerns about legal and legacy exposures for a government agency. For crying out loud, get it up, get it going. It didn't get going until 2019, 2 years too late. So there's a massive void in the way that we understood and know our buildings, understood and reacted to the crisis, and how we help these people. And there's this big, massive piece of work that's going on with the adoption of the Hackett Review, the Grenfell Inquiry Phase 1, under the auspice of the Construction Industry Council. They have done a report called Raising the Bar, Raising the Statutory Bar and Setting the Bar. And when you look through the list, great everybody's put in, but it's predominantly professional bodies, trade organisations, and very, very little, if any, resident representation. And I would strongly impress upon clan campaigners, reach out to the friendly, impartial experts and get them in the meetings when you go to meet with government and the ministers. Use them as ministers do. They have a civil servant, technical advisor sitting next to them, helping them with the petitions and lobbying. Please start doing that. We're all doing this work pro bono. It is costing us our careers. It is costing us time and relationships. I don't bemoan what I do, but we can do it a lot more effective. We can stop you being fobbed off by ministers. We know the subject matter better than they do at times. I think one thing I want to put in here, I've done a number of assignments with one housing association, a very large one in the UK, the immediate weeks after Grenfell. And it's then when the penny drops on the technical issues and the gaps and the effectiveness of the guidance and the excruciating rollout of 10, 50, 100, 500 buildings that are impacted. And giving government a route map saying, don't put out the test report at 5 o'clock on a Friday, because as a fire safety manager for a large housing association, I can do nothing to appease residents' concerns. You know, please help us. They did listen to some aspects, but it was never acknowledged in public. I have managed on to one of the Hackett pilot study workshops with MHCLG. It was too short notice, 72 hours. There was no advance brief. We didn't understand why we were in the room. And I was working for a local authority at this time and sitting and very vocal on the London Council's fire directors group, very vocal in challenging government, challenging statutory agency, and highlighting the issues. So it's not as if it's Steve speaking out on Twitter. It's Steve speaking at London councils. It's Steve speaking at the Mayor of London's Fire Summit. It's Steve speaking to a fire sector summit, speaking at FireX, speaking in national and international media. But I still can't get a meeting with a minister or the civil service. I've given up trying. But at that meeting, the Hackett pilot study, actually to stop the meeting at one point and say, why am I here? What is the objective of this meeting? And what can you do to help us? Why, if you're adopting the Hackett review, are you asking us for the solutions? So what I did was outlined, I need interim measures just now to stabilise the safety in my 40,000 units in this local authority in X number of high rise. And I ain't the biggest local authority. I need resources to boost my team, to clean down my dirty data, identify and sift all the buildings, get proper risk assessments in place, and have the money on tap to address over 30,000 legacy fire safety issues. I need that today. Not this meeting, I need that.
I think that's a key point, Steve, just to jump in there, is that until you start, I think it's very easy when if you live in a building and you think, okay, this is a building that is owned by a housing association X, and I need EWS 1 because I want to move on, or I want a staircase, do I, don't I, or is the building safe, etc., etc. And it's very completely understandable that is your world, that's where you live, and it's absolutely right that building should be safe, and your landlord or management company should be able to evidence it's a safe building. Okay, that's a given. But if you look at it from the other side and say, if you're working in one of those organizations where you've got 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 buildings to manage, these are colossal organizations that historically have been very poor at managing process and data. They're not process-driven, data-driven organizations. So everything is kind of manually spreadsheeted, paper filed, et cetera, and we're talking about years, because often they're sleepy buildings that are fairly low risk, and they've been handed between different organizations and used to be in a council and got sold off into a housing association, et cetera. Yeah. They've then merged, and their data structures are different, and it's, I think for most people that are on the resident side would probably be quite incredulous at what a mess it is on the other side, on the management side. So you're entirely right that these things take time. And if we look at the failings at Grenfell, or we look at the failings in other buildings now, they happened over time. And they were allowed to happen for lots of reasons. So they got to that point of being unsafe fairly slowly quite often, and making them safe again is actually quite a slow process. Slower than we would like it to be. And I think there's that dawning realization, I think, that even from the government, that, and I talked about it earlier on another recording, that if we were to wave the magic wand and say, look, money is no object, spend whatever you need, fix the problem, that will still take a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's not a 5-minute, 5-month fix. So we do need to learn how to live with this risk as well, and we need to get better at living with it. But to do that, we need to quantify it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to come back to that second point. I want to go back to this pilot meeting with MHCLG, because there's a couple of important things. One of the things that I did say, and I said, look, there are regimes out there under the current legislation and under current standards we can adopt today. But what I really need is, I need funding, I need resources, I need capacity, I need capability to recover now. Today, next week, next month, next year. That's what I need. Put the Hackett and the legislation rollout back 3 to 5 years. It's going to take that long to debug it, get everything there, get the primary legislation in, get the secondary legislation, get all the guidance in, and test it. Don't give me another experiment I've already had there. What we need to do is this funding, recovery, capacity, capability to enable us to make the building safe just now. And then roll out what we do in new buildings. Okay, so you need to look at that. and we can have a private session on that. I can give you work that I did in 2007 with the new conversion from a British standard BS 5588 Part 12, the management standard, into BS 9999, and now there's BS 991, the residential equivalent. We can use that, and it will be a precursor to the Hackett Review safety cases. So it's not abortive work. It gives us a framework, it gives us an intervention, but what I need is, I need the staff, I need the data platform, I need common guidance, and let's use London councils. Give us a residential or local authority fire code as we've got in the NHS, which gives us a top tier health technical memorandum, a national fire code to apply, and we apply it with consistency. And it's got all the legislation interpretation and all the technical detail, but it's for residential building. And I've also said, stop moving the goalposts. Because what you're doing with this guidance is moving the statutory bar up and up and up and up, whereby I'm still working with a local authority that has got a risk-based regime where we can carry risk. So as a building degrades, we need to put more work into it. We need to maintain systems, replace systems, refurbish buildings down the line. But that's a very slow process over 10, 20, 50 years. We need to be able to manage our risk, but now you've told us zero risk. And everybody's getting confused now between what is compliant versus what is acceptable versus what is safe. So I have a busy day job for a housing provider as an independent consultant. Every single one has dirty data, incomplete data, and is using, as you said, paper-based or Excel-based systems. It is nonsense. Every local authority is latched on to the purpose-built guide, which says type 1 risk assessment suffice. What, for the whole building? Type 1 is only the communal areas and it's a visual survey. No, we need good, solid type 4, building-wide, intrusive, proving risk assessments to then allow us to prioritise, to then allow us to actually bid for the funds to maintain our stock. We don't have that. Local authorities aren't very good sometimes with understanding what their statutory responsibility is. And as a fire officer, a fire safety manager, I'm a tiny voice in each committee or the council cabinet or local government or central government. I'm a tiny voice, really tiny voice. Doesn't matter how many years or how many qualifications or how many letters after my name, I'm a tiny voice. And we're trying to represent 1.5 million residents now. We have no funding, we have no resource, and we're doing it all pro bono and self-funding it just now. The amount of time we're having to take off paid assignments is phenomenal. And personally, it's cost me my relationship, my family, and my home. In fact, it's cost me my most recent job because my most recent employer thought I was spending too much time in Grenfell. Fantastic, we see the Daily Mail campaign. Fantastic, we see leaseholder reform. Fantastic, we see Wake and Watch remedial fund. But we've very hard for every piece and scrap from the government's table. And understand the government's position. They don't want to open the floodgates. But they are going to the traditional fixers, or as I call them, they're going to the traditional architects, engineers, constructors, manufacturers, regulators, and enforcers of this crisis. You need to take an approach that isn't groupthink and listen to the independents. Even if you want to determine we're just making noise or we don't have full sight, listen to it. One group I will shout out, the National Fire Chiefs Council, did eventually invite me on the simultaneous evacuation guide. But I wasn't able to resource it fully. But I did give comment and I did give fair representation for residents to say, Wake and Watch should only be a temporary 3 to 6 month provision. We can put fire alarms in, we can strip off cladding. So we need funds to enable that. And that was said last year. We also raised concerns about the cost and impact of post-Grenfell. We also raised the loss of confidence in stay put and the move to simultaneous evacuation. We also raised the issue of why isn't there more prohibition notices or enforcement notices for every single impacted building? Why hasn't government taken ownership of its contribution to Grenfell and this national crisis affecting millions of people now? These are families. Yet some have made investments under buy-to-let. Some have spent their wealth buying a penthouse. But the majority of families, I'll guarantee, are under right to buy, shared ownership, or first-time buyers. These are young families. And many of these, excuse me, many of these people now are landlords in a dangerous, unsafe building, but are hit with the added insult they're now liable for all the costs. The system is broken. We know that. But what we don't have is the robust resolution and solution. We actually need a group that not only maps the problems, but maps the solutions. And I've read Raising the Bar and Setting the Bar. Good pieces of work, great academic pieces of work, but practical real-world application, I'm really sorry. It's going to lump more cost, more administration burdens. And as I said about the Hackett review, it's a bastardized wish list of measures that doesn't understand the construction sector, is trying to turn the Titanic, and will be cost prohibitive to implement. And I think cost and time prohibitive. We need to sort it now. Get a good, strong baseline. I'll keep going back to the Australian government, and I'll keep going back to the Scottish government, because one or both has made the right or a terribly wrong decision when we look at English central government. The Lacrosse fire happened in 2014. It went through the tribunal process. The tribunal, the building owners brought a case against the contractor. And the tribunal judge says, yes, the contractor is at fault. However, they have vicarious liability against the project team, the surveyor, the building control, the fire engineer, the architect, etc., and the person that caused the fire, but they weren't pursued. So therefore, the contractor, you are at fault because you should have employed a competent team and made this building safe, but you have been let down by your project team. That's played out across the country. So who's responsible for the design, specification, engineering, construction, regulatory approvals, handover and acceptance of all these buildings? I want to see that map. That's who you shake down for the money. So as the Australians did in the state of Victoria, government put a crack team together, assess all your buildings, understand the risks, understand the mitigation, fund the mitigation, then pursue the cost recovery.
Yeah, you do the analysis and you say, okay, in building A, these were the constituent parts. This is how we apportion liability, move on to building B. Whereas in this country, you would probably bring multiple legal actions simultaneously, which would be cost prohibitive anyway, or you would sue one and then they would counter sue, and you'd end up with years and years of a chain of legal actions as opposed to a resolution.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. When I go into a local authority, right, where is your portfolio? Where's your high-risk buildings? Don't be blinkered just in high-rise. Look at, in a local authority, look at your high-rise, look at your sheltered, look at your hostels. That's your 3 archetype high-risk premises.
Can I just jump in there? So I think what we need to get across is that high-rise doesn't necessarily mean high-risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point that often gets diluted, because, you know, if Grenfell had been half the height but twice the width with the same number of casualties, we'd be having a different conversation now. So I think we do need to think about property type, and we need a way of benchmarking against each other from a risk perspective. So, and I think we've seen that in the Building Safety Bill oral consultation hearings, where a number, including the fire chiefs, were kept saying, we need to look at the scope of the new regulation. There are significant high-risk buildings that are excluded from the scope of the building safety regulator at the moment. And the reason for that is the building safety regulator is a response to Grenfell.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily making the greatest number of people as safe as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we really need to get in a room with a bunch of boards and map all the problems, all the issues, and then tease out all the solutions. And then cluster what's viable, what's not viable, what's short, medium, long term, just classic management theory. So when I go into local authorities, I look at the property portfolio and go, right, okay, how accurate is this? It's never accurate. Where's your risk assessments? And in two local authorities, we've had to re-sift and redo risk assessments and reprocess them because people don't understand the difference between a risk grading, frequency of assessment, and a risk rank, how dangerous it is. I'm interested in that just now.
Yeah.
And then when we looked at prioritisation of, say, remedial works, putting in fire suppression, they'd removed the cladding. But we're still wedded to this concept of a building with a single story plus cladding is a high-risk building. But I'm saying, but you've removed the cladding. Yeah, but we've prioritised those 9 or 10 buildings. And I'm going, no, I've got another 24-story building without cladding, with single stair core, but it's not on the list for fire suppression. That is your target building. And we to change the way the local authority and the project teams looked, and it made me very unpopular at committees, to say, no, you've wasted your time the past 18 months, junk it, start again. And that's essentially what we're having to do. When we raise issues at London councils and we raise issues with MHCLG trying to get EPS tested, we wasted months doing that, the intellectual and the time basis, and then eventually said, yes, we know it's combustible, but we're not testing it. What do I do then? Where do I go? And I've been chilled and criticised on social media for saying, right, I'm taking a complaint to the Parliamentary Ombudsman. It's the wrong route. What is the right route? Maybe a judicial review. Well, that's very hard to and expensive to log and mount. So if I can't get headway with government or local government or the principal stakeholders, i.e. the fire service, the building research establishment, etc., how are residents and how are campaign groups? So what they've achieved today is phenomenal. It's fantastic. But we still have a mismatch. We have a Grenfell response to a building safety crisis, as you quite rightly said. We've got a legislative response to an immediate safety issue. We have to address these issues. Government probably says we are under an advisory notice, under our guidance, under our reviews. But look, take it, what you've done, package it and communicate it in a better way. Don't communicate government speak. Most of our legislation and guidance is probably just about there because it's been developed by a technical committee. But then the regulators get a hold of it. Then the legal counsel gets a hold of it. And then it becomes gobbledygook. And then it's open to interpretation. If we can't get the current system right through modification, how the hell are we going to roll out a new and more complex system? That's my greatest fear.
Well, yeah, I think that I did a report about this about 6 months ago, which I'll try and put the link out to again, but looking into that and interviewing large landlords around how long they thought it would take them to get ready for the new building safety regulator. And it's months and months, but the caveat was from when we know what we're meant to be doing, which we don't know at the moment. But then you look at the impact assessment and the staging for the building safety bill and say, okay, well, there's 13,000 buildings or so in scope of the building safety regulator currently. So plus 18-metre residential apartment buildings. And my understanding is that their expectation is that they will stage over 7 years from the point the regulator starts. So we're talking about a tiny, tiny slice of the overall building stock that is going to be under the auspices of this magical new regulator if and when it starts. And then you layer in the fact that I think it's got about £16 million of funding to get it going, with manual processing is not a lot of people by the time they've got their swanky office wherever they choose to put that, and they've got some basic IT systems and some people and a high-paid chief exec and a chairperson and a board. That 16 million will disappear in a nanosecond. So unless they're going to raise significant amounts of money through enforcement, which they probably will, because I don't see that many buildings will be compliant in any way, because they won't be able to get ready in time because they haven't put the work in now ahead of the regulator. So there seems to be this standoff in terms of, when they tell me what I need to do, I'll go and do it. But we're not giving that guidance, because we say, no, this is a risk-based regulatory regime, go and write your building safety case, and then we will apply hindsight to tell you whether we think it was sufficient or not. But cutting through all of that, in private blocks, the cost of that risk management or over risk management or backside covering, call it what you want, falls straight back at the doorstep of the leaseholder through the building safety charge.
And that's why when the Hackett review came out and the government adopted it, I told everyone, look at the regulatory impact assessment, and those figures are underestimated. Very much underestimated, because the intelligence I got from London councils, and I've been told off for speaking public, those meetings are in confidence. Well, I'm not breaching confidence. It's a public-based meeting for local authorities. You know, it's FOIable. All I'm doing is short-circuiting things. The views are known. There's an independent expert embedded within that committee. The committee was doing very good work and making a lot of sense, and it should have been taken back by government with a lot of consensus about it. That was the basis and the premises of the practical application of everything, was that group. Unfortunately, that group was only included in the Hackett early adopters as an afterthought. We had to lobby until 2019, because government, again, went to the private sector, went to the housing associations, went to the private developers and contractors for the Hackett early adopters. Don't know how they were selected. And then we had to force the issue where government said, yes, local authorities can come on. But mine wasn't, and that just raises hackles about transparency. Take the medicine, take the bitter pill, along with the sweets and the treats, to get this turned round. Okay, if you don't like me, go and get someone else. But take someone that's going to give you a balanced view. The government is driving people into very expensive safety cases, £30,000 to £50,000 per one, when we haven't even got proper risk assessments yet. So take a step back, get every building a Type 4 risk assessment and an EWS 1. Okay, free up that market logjam for residents, mortgage providers and insurance, and free up the funds to fix that Type 4 if it comes back adverse. We still haven't got that in 3.5 years. We then don't have risk mitigation plans. We then don't have capital and repair and maintenance and reactive repair budgets for local authorities and housing providers. And as you said, it falls straight down the money tree to the resident. So £30,000 to £50,000 just for the safety case, £40,000 to £60,000 for a building safety manager, plus on cost, plus overhead, plus profit at every single level. That cost starts ramping up. That safety case might be 20 or 30 grand, but end up costing 100 to 150 grand to administer that system. And I don't think it's right.
Also, Steve, I think if that were me, with that increased criminal liability as an accountable person or as a building safety manager, putting together that building safety case, there is an absolute incentive to move to zero harm, zero risk kind of thinking. Because actually, I will do everything I possibly can to mitigate that risk, because that's my neck on the line. But if I've got a mechanism to do that, a budgetary mechanism to do that by charging that to leaseholders, I can do it. So, and that's a dynamic document by design, or a dynamic structure. As we understand more about different types of risk or different kinds of events, different technologies come forward, we learn about materials, there is effectively an open checkbook there on behalf of leaseholders to go and continuously improve and upgrade the building from a safety perspective. So, and there is no mechanism to turn around and say, hang on a minute, I'm happy with the level of safety in this building. External experts have come in and given a different view. You have the power as the accountable person to say, I'm sorry, I'm the accountable person. I say what goes.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, sell your flat to someone else, if you can. Yeah. So there is absolutely no reason under the building safety charge regime that is being established unless it gets changed. And there is actually an incentive to fleece, or maybe just have an unbelievably low risk appetite. And as I always say to people when I take them through risk assessment and risk mitigation plans, is that typically the lower the risk, the more expensive it becomes in general terms. So at what point do you say enough is enough? Where is there a level that in a commercial world you're commercially comfortable with? And there is no such level within the building safety bill. It's entirely subjective.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. How does each fire safety system mitigate each risk and hazard? How does each fire safety system contribute to the overall fire safety performance, as purported by the risk assessment and the safety case, or apples and bananas? Where is the fundamental empirical research? Well, I've took a look at the MHCLG research. It's been slipping out very quietly under fast track procurements. I think it's the wrong research. Toxicology, yes, we need to do it, but if we remove all the combustible cladding, we don't need to look at toxicology. For example, £600,000. But give me a proper risk assessment, IT-driven tool, which is robust and tested to take out engineering judgment or risk appetites, would be far more effective. Give me. We do
need those empirical measures, because it's sort of, I like to equate a lot of the things I talk about to cars, because everybody most people understand cars maybe more than they do fire engineering or whatever. I think the equivalent would be, we introduce with the building safety bill, we introduced that all buildings have got to have an MOT, for example, but the MOT testers all have differing opinions on what minimum tread depth should be on some tyres. Yeah. So depending on who you take it to, so then you get to the point where I could become the MOT tester that's very lax on tyre tread depth. So everybody locally knows, take it to Matt's MOT shop because you'll get a pass from him. Whereas if you take it to Steve, he won't pass it. So there's so much subjectivity in the whole process that, and that's born out of in financial services regulation, for example, that it's a commercial structure and the regulator will make a commercial judgment. But here I think we need more rules-based management, and those rules need to be properly researched and properly thought through and properly set, but we need a minimum standard. And what we're trying to do with the building safety bill, I think, is almost go to this zero harm mentality on the basis of fire and structural integrity risk, but not on the basis of ruining our customers or our residents financially and emotionally. And so there's no understanding of, if we move to this lower level of risk, what is the second order impact to the people that we're going to bill for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, say, what I was proposing about in 2007. A risk-informed fire safety management regime that is delivered by a competent fire engineer or fire safety management professional. And we seem to have a hybrid now. We've got prescriptive legislation over here. We've got the Hackett Review and building safety cases over there. We've got EWS somewhere in the middle. We've got the FIE bloody terrible building safety portal, which is just going to increase costs on everybody and limit the number of engineers that can work on doing these EWS1 assessments. So bin it. get things that don't work off the table. The entire fire community has been debating about moving away from prescriptive rule-based regulation for the past 30 years and moving towards performance-based or engineering-based solutions. We look at each building on a case-by-case basis, and we have an engineer with the check and balance of a competent regulator and enforcer to come up with a strategy. So do we need a building safety case? No, we need an assessment of risk, we need a fire strategy, and we need an operational management plan. And then what we can do is, and a lot of people use the term wrongly, value engineer it, make it better. And I know the chap that came up with the term value engineering. I used to work beside him at Glasgow University, and his name has escaped me. It will come back to me. But he looked at the matrices of quality, compliance, value, cost. It isn't just about the cost. It isn't about the cheapest product. Because what we did when we did early risk assessments, we could look at a property portfolio in a university and say, wait a minute, you've got labs scattered all over your property portfolio. Bring them together into 2 buildings, not 1, but 2, and put fire suppression that's appropriate for the materials you're handling in each of those buildings. And somebody said, why 2 buildings? I said, because if one burns down, you've still got one as a fallback. Contingency and redundancy. And what will go wrong, can go wrong, will go wrong. What has happened is we've had fairly robust legislation that's come through expert committees and analysis of major fires, and we've got these cookbooks. Oh, firefighting ladders 18 metres, right, that's the highest threshold. And some of it is nonsense. We've got a better scientific engineering and empirical basis now. Start sweeping that up and making that rule book better. But also give us the engineering judgment and the risk basis to manage risk. It's like saying, all these buildings have been targeted. If you've got timber on the building, it will fail an EWS1. Not one. Because if you think about a limited bit of timber decking under a window on a balcony, if you get a fire in the flat, the window's going to break and run up the outside of the building. Balcony might not make that great a difference between an internal fire and an external fire. Unless it's on a high rise, unless the timber is off the volume that we've seen at Barking balconies, a compliant fire hazard. You know, and government's even moving back and saying, balconies not eligible for building safety fund. So it's went to 0 risks, but now having to walk back because it realises the cost and the implication on the residents. And residents come to me and say, my building's unsafe when I'm in a local authority. And I go out and I spend the day and I walk around the site and go, yes, there is need of the estate is run down. It is in a capital works programme. I have other priorities, but your building's relatively safe. How? And I'm going, because you step out the front door and it vents to atmosphere. The smoke rises and dissipates. Could you get caught on a dead end? Possibly, but you're only a 2-storey building. Whereas I've got a major problem with 217 other high-rise that I need to look at, or 30-odd residential care homes, or all my hostels, because of other dynamics. So what we had to do with that local authority was we had some very, very vocal residents, was to communicate to them. Communicate as equals, highlight that this committee could inform my priorities to take back to the council cabinet. And I was listening, and recover that and deal with the strong characters and the professional complainers. In fact, we had a major win. There was one lady who's widely known as being a holy terror in the local authority, but she sent an email and said, I'm resigning all my committees because if you've got people at Steve, he'll make sure you're right. You know, and I thought that's a great testimonial. We had to have the expertise. We had to make the tough choices. We have to make the tough decisions. And I think some of the criticism of the National Fire Chiefs Council, the fire sector and the government is wholly appropriate. It's wholly appropriate and should happen, and they should listen. I think they could do a better job of communicating why they made the decision. Prohibition knows you are out your home versus wake and watch for a short period of time. Prohibition, you're out your home, you still need to pay for your rent, your ground rent, the service charges, the remedial costs, the wake and watch, etc., and the fire alarm, as we've seen in Sheffield. Everybody was still hit with all those costs. But that right to manage residents, Management Co. turned it around in a week and drew in a lot of good faith to do that because they didn't have enough money in the pot. It was coming up to year end. They exhausted it. So it was a good example of the enforcement agency triggered something horrific for the residents and it would run up to Christmas, but it was turned around within a week. Okay? And it's unpalatable at the same. We maybe need to see more of that.
Do you think, that's a good question, I mean, do you think we're going to see a greater level of enforcement going forward or prohibition going forward?
I think so, because the government and its enforcement agencies are exposed, and they're exposed for Grenfell too. Although we hope all high-rise have now been assessed and there's robust mitigation in place, we still aren't confident about wake and watch. We aren't confident about the remedial replacement of cladding. We are not confident that some buildings such as the Manchester Quarter has replaced its ACM, but all the HPL was left and it's now caught in a second wave crisis and it's soul destroying. And I'm terribly worried about mental health stressors and instances of suicide. Having worked in the NHS and having worked in secure mental health units, I'm terribly worried about the emotional impact. And the longer it goes on, the greater the impact. The government is also sympathetic to employers and building owners and operators that say, well, I need the pot of money from the residents to fix this private building. And even local authorities are saying, well, under Section 20, I'm dependent on this pot of money from right to buy and leaseholders to fix their share of the building. And what we've got is we've got an almighty broken legal system from leasehold, even following announcements today, even with common hold. Common hold just means there's no freeholder and no building owner. The individual flat holders own their bit of the building and they engage a management course. But in Scotland, where we don't have leasehold, it's mostly common holder equivalent. All the costs are going straight to the resident.
I think that's a key point for anyone that's listening to this that isn't aware of that process. That, you know, if for example, there are 100 flats in a building, each one of them is paying 1/100th, for example, of the cost of remediation, and 90 stump up the money and 10 can't or won't. You cannot proceed. There isn't a mechanism to do that. So you have to get to the point where 100 units of money have been received before you can go ahead and commission the work at the moment, unless something changes. And again, from what we can see from the residents we talk to, is that there are some people that say, as a point of principle, I am absolutely not paying. I can, but I'm absolutely not. It's not my fault. Others that say, I could probably scratch the money together and I really don't want to, but you know, if I have to, I have to. And others that we've seen that have just handed the keys back and said, I'm declared bankruptcy. And others maybe that would just turn around and say, well, I can afford it, I don't like it, but life goes on. Yeah. So you've got that range, and so even managing this process through to get to a point where you can get the works to go ahead is hugely difficult. Another thing, I don't know whether we've spoken about it, is that has come to me, is that for those that enter the Building Safety Fund process or accepted into the full application, there are some pretty onerous non-disclosure terms in that agreement with the government for the funding, in the funding application.
I think breaking it down again, you know, I mean, I spent a lot of time in academia and educating young professionals coming into the construction, architecture, building, surveying, fire engineering, and the regulatory communities. Spent an awful lot of time. And I think there is a need for better guidance and communication. about what the crisis is and what the problems is. So if you or I own a detached house and we find that our electrical wiring is dangerous, we're liable for that cost. There's no recovery unless the government and trading standards or the courts find that that electrical wiring, that wire was defective. Then we get a case against the manufacturer. Now we scale it up to high rise. The government is bound by what it can and can't do with state aid. And it openly admits they can only foot the gnarly costs, the headline issue, the cladding, the fire alarm, instead of wake and watch. And we've had to campaign for that. The government needs to extend that and look at alternative ways of pursuing cost recovery, which is shared by the residents, which UK Clad have said, look, we are here, we understand, we've got a part to put in, but not all the cost, not 100% of the cost. Maybe 5% of the cost, 2% of the cost, and an affordability matrix. And the remedials shouldn't be dependent on having 99 or 100% input to get that building safe. Because what we've seen with the ones with council, the council wanted to go and put fire doors in, put fire alarms in, put fire suppression in. But it's then bound under Section 20 to recover from the right to buy. So it tried to force it, and then some residents said no, and you're not getting in. Tribunal then upheld, no, you don't have powers of rights of access. So the local authorities caught, we're trying to make this building safer, but we can't now. And anyone that says, well, just put fire suppression, fire alarm in the rest of the building, yeah, you'll have better cover, but you don't have zero risks. And I'll guarantee the fire is a phenomenon that will be where you get the fire.
Yeah,
you know,
the law of sod will dictate that that's the source. Yeah.
So we've got this very, very complicated problem, and what we need is a better. The minister runs a series of roundtables, link up these roundtables, and have people that are trusted to debate the issues, or have a series of tables, have a series of workshops, and start working on what is the resolution, instead of the government saying, thou shalt, we can and can't do this. The Building Safety Fund, as it currently stands, is a contractual agreement with the carrot of getting money to fix your building, but there's a bloody big stick behind it if you're not eligible. And residents are now wise to that. If I call the fire service with a concern, I will potentially get week and watch, and I can't risk that cost. So people are now hiding in unsafe buildings and unsafe houses. People now don't have an outlet for gaining government aid. It's overly complicated. And the residents can't even apply for it. The residents can't even get their own EWS1 to get a sale through. It's got to go through the building provider. And we see that in gas safety. I can't get the National Gas Safe Register to come and test my landlord's boiler. He's got to have the landlord's permission. He's got to have the engineer that did it. And we've had a spate of gas explosions in the country. 2020, and we've had one recently this week also. So there are still barriers to safety: financial, physical, administrative, technological, experiential competency. So the government keeping banging on about this is all the industry's fault, it's all down to competency. Sorry, no. Bad politics, bad legislation, bad guidance, bad competency, bad checks and balances, bad crisis response. Yeah. So take those blocks and go, what is the issue? What is the resolution? What is the output? What is realistic? Low, medium, high. And that's where we get regulatory impact assessments. But everybody is now overwhelmed. In 2017, I was saying, stop. With the advisory notes, the legislative changes, the announcements, we're overwhelmed. 2018 is exponential. 2019, exponential. 2020, we're just about on our knees. How is a fire safety manager with a busy day job supposed to take on Grenfell inquiry, 350,000 pieces of evidence, daily sessions and briefings that you need to listen to very carefully. The Grenfell inquiry chair even said, don't look at my summary, look at all the reports and all the evidence. How am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to deal with breakdowns, failures, fatality incidents, fires, near misses, statutory inspections, risk assessments, remedial works, capital works, keep up to date with legislation, train myself, train my staff, if I have any? How am I supposed to do that? Then roll out the Grenfell Inquiry Phase 1, Hackett review, raising the bar, setting the bar. There's about 200, 300 in 2019's count, government advisory notices and outputs on Grenfell. How am I supposed to read that? How am I supposed to read everything that's coming out of the industry and sector? And there's duplication and duplication. Okay, CIC, doing a great job, never been done before. Bring everybody together around the table. Let's fine tune it. Listen to the critics. I don't understand why I've never been invited to the government's task group, the government's expert groups, some of the other trade and industry groups. You know, I've been asked to comment on things informally for some of the professional bodies, and then I find out this week they've run full professional groups looking at fire data. You know, if I'm good enough to speak offline to address an issue, put me on a formal group as well. And it's about the government as well. We know they watch the Twitter feed, we know they watch social media. When I used to raise issues about government response to Grenfell, it'd take maybe a couple of weeks to respond. Then it was a couple of days. Now it's about 20 minutes. They're all over it. They're on it. You know, and I get criticised. I get criticised for suggesting Cobra should have met the day off Chalcott's estate being evacuated. We find out a year and a half later that Cobra met on the Saturday, just wasn't published. You know, manage the story. When I called on a public inquiry at Glasgow School of Art in 2014, the Charles Rennie Mackintosh building, burnt down during construction, call for a public inquiry, fobbed off, scorned by the government and media, etc. 2018, another fire, lost the building in its entirety. Again, call for a public inquiry, and it was too early to say. We don't want conjecture and supposition. No, I'm an academic, I'm an engineer. I generate a hypothesis to test. I generate theories for test. So I will highlight the issues as I see them from the length of information. Let's go away and test it. Prove or disprove. The Scottish Government's approach through social media, they picked up one of my Twitter threads and said, this guy makes a lot of sense. Have a read. Then I'm invited to Scottish Parliament Select Committee. Then I give very pointed views, as I do in media and on social media, national media and international media, and those recommendations are adopted. Yes, the respondent tried to discredit me and the other expert, but it backfired on them. The recommendations were adopted. We're waiting for the fire investigation. MHCLG, we're communicating with them directly and we can't get on any committees. If we do get on a committee, we're not invited back. That's wrong, because the residents see that. And whether residents all like me, some of them like me, or none of them like me, I'm here to represent the public interest and try and mediate between government, the sector, the housing providers, the management cores, and the residents.
I think that's a really good point with all of us, that there might be a perception that, oh, well, you're on the side of, you're on that side or you're on this side. And actually, genuinely, we will work with anybody that's got the right intent. If they genuinely want to sort out building safety, they want to keep people safe in their homes, they want to find solutions. Personally, I'm open to speaking to anybody. If the government want to come back and say, look, we're sorry for ignoring you for the last 2 and a bit years. Actually, do you know what? That was a mistake. We should have had a proper conversation and engaged. I'll be there like a shot. No problem at all, because I want to help solve this problem.
Yeah.
But it's a real shame when it's almost, the way I feel, it's almost politicized in terms of solving this issue. I put something out the other day about giving Lord Greenhalgh a hug, socially distanced hug. Let's all work it out together and hug it out. Genuinely mean it. You know, the only way we will solve this is by working together. But to do that, you can't do it within a culture of it's all the fault of others. It's not the fault of us. It's not the fault of me. It's them. Because we're just going to get this adversarial element to it, that we have got this adversarial element that is getting in the way of progress. And we kind of almost need to get to that point where, you know, we're not talking through the divorce lawyers, we're talking with a mediator, and we're all agreeing to get on with each other. But that, I guess, requires everybody to sort of de-escalate and step down off their high horse a bit and say, okay, let's agree that we've all done things that maybe we shouldn't have done in this. Let's resolve it. The only place I would reserve absolutely no blame in all of this is for the innocent leaseholders that bought in good faith and trusted in the regulatory environment. Now, behind the scenes, how much of it was the government's fault? How much was it with that person that wrote the guidance? How much was it the company that maybe played fast and loose with the test data? How much was it with the test? You know, these are all downstream discussions. But what we can't get away from is there was a massive incident. The government quite clearly said there were problems that led to that incident and have said we've got to put this right. And then not stepped up to support, you know, they set the hairs running by saying everything was unsafe, but haven't actually taken responsibility for the impact. I think, to me, that's where the biggest failing is that regardless of what's happened, we've gone out and told people that they're living in unsafe homes. And you can't put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
So you've got to live with the consequences, government and taxpayers, and we have to resolve this issue, and we've got to work together to do it. Yeah,
I mean, I think I modified the statement. You know, categorically, the residents and the individual families and individuals caught up in this. They have bought homes, or investments, if it's right, buy to let. They've bought a home for themselves or for someone else, and they bought it as a safe home, and it's now not. They aren't responsible for this in any way, shape, means. Lease contracts and all the monies that goes in from leaseholders and residents is to pay for future maintenance, repair, and statutory compliance. Is never intended for a product safety failure. And that's what this is. It's a product safety failure, it's a regulatory failure, it's a sector failure. And I think it's quite right with some of the big campaign groups and the journalists this week saying, industry, you've made billions, put money back in. Or government, take that money under a levy. And I think there's some very good ideas about, I've spoken frequently, and it comes about my knowledge about disability equipment and accessibility equipment and energy performance and carbon zero agendas. No VAT. Why the hell are we paying VAT on safety measures? Anywhere. Come off it. And what's the implication for government if we waive those? Very hard, very difficult to demonstrate. For Jesus, drop it from 20% to 5%, or ideally 0%. Give everybody half a chance here. Cap the rates for wake and watch. £15 an hour, or you're having a laugh. £15 an hour for a licensed professional under the Home Office Security Industry Authority licence. Extend that to include wake and watch. Very easy, quick win. If there's any number of service companies out there like Capta PLC or Modus or Amy or Mighty or these groups that could administer this within 6 months. The residents need the most support just now, and that's where my attention is. But I'm also trying to take commercial and housing assignments to support them, to understand their perspective, their issue. I'm trying to engage with the sector. I'm trying to engage with other professionals. I'm screaming out for the sector professionals. Stop tinkering behind the scenes, raising and setting the bar. get on with practical delivery? And can we please force out the charlatans, the Phoenix companies, the fraudsters, and the ambulance chasers? I've intentionally not taken 1 penny in media fees or 1 penny off an impacted resident or even a resident management quote. It's all pro bono to try and reinstill from good faith. But imagine every other construction professional, if they charged a penny to do an EWS1 survey and make the money through the normal business activity, how much pressure that could take off. Too many companies are starting up. Too many companies are very unsavory. And I've been caught with that recently myself. We need to stop that. We need to have a very dynamic solution to this across the board. Where's trade and standards? Where's product safety? Where's product certification and recall? You know, why is the industry dividing up the sector? Why do we have the spectre of backdoor privatisation and cost recovery through legislators? Is the joint regulator there and all this new legislation there to improve safety or introduce cost recovery? Well, I'm sceptical on that one. I think it's the latter. Okay, yeah. The residents need the most help, but I think the sector and the government also needs a guiding hand. I think there's been some very good politicians out there and some very good civil servants. I have said that the fire service did a good job at Grenfell, faced with the circumstances on that night. Mistakes were made, lives were lost, we acknowledge that. But individual firefighters, I think the Fire Authority in Camden Council did the right thing at Camden. But with the backlash, it led to, instead of prohibition enforcement notices, it led to wake and wash. So we displaced the issue. I think we keep knocking that can down the road, and it will stop with Grenfell too. I think we have new ministers. I think James Brokenshire did a very good job. He went into common select committees. He knew the material. He knew the brief. He was well versed. He's a legal practitioner. He didn't need a civil servant. He did not like the Hackett Review and actually slated it. He introduced the notional cladding ban. He introduced the Building Safety Fund. He got the MHCLG moving in the right direction. And I think that was a good politician that wasn't recognised. I know the Minister Stephen Guyhill is very controversial. He's got a toxic portfolio between faith leaders, in the midst of Brexit, in the midst of COVID, bridging between Home Office and MHCLG, picking up Grenfell, picking up building safety, picking up leasehold reform. But he needs to open that door to engage. So does the civil service. Or the consequence is, I'll be vociferous in media and social media about my criticism. You know, so we need to break that down. And ministers need to stop bringing in the resident campaign groups and fobbing them off. It worked first, second, third time. Ain't going to work down the line. And stop drip feeding money out. You know, what was it? 0.6 billion for ACM, 1 billion for non-ACM, 30 million for wake and watch relief, when we've got a 15, 30 or 100 billion pound problem. You know, the protection board, what is it doing? The joint inspection team, what is it doing? Where's the dashboards? Why don't we see any dashboard and government data on the fire door product recall? What's the status of it? What is the actual number of non-ACMs? How are you recovering the position from not testing EPS and other things? What are you doing about balconies? A lot of people don't realise that the purpose-built flat guidance actually recommended against communal fire alarms. Those in local authorities know that we put communal fire alarms in. We then took them out when the fire authority started charging us for unwanted fire calls. Then we've got guidance that says type 1 risk assessments and not having communal fire alarms is recommended, but the same person is now commissioned by the Home Office to update that guidance. And I keep hearing from the sector on some of the Hackett committees and some of the other committees that a product representative is outnumbered 4-5 to 1 by the product competitors. So the foam insulation manufacturers might outgun the rock wool manufacturer by 4-5 to 1. The deck is loaded. But we're playing Russian roulette with residents' lives now, and that is completely wrong. And I think this is not elevated to a high enough degree by government. They are throwing money at it, an asset at it, 200 civil servants, the best minds of Whitehall, the ones not distracted by Brexit or COVID. What are you doing tonight to save that family? What are you doing tonight to save that tower block? And I'm not just talking about the fire, the stress, the trauma, etc. And residents are now starting to step up. They've been very proactive in their community and campaign groups. They're very conversant with media. They sell newspapers, and they will promote politicians on the safety card. Wait till the residents start seeing the output of the Grenfell inquiry and start looking towards the criminal proceedings, the companies and individuals' responsibility in civil actions. It's coming down the line. And these residents should be eligible for immediate safety relief and fund to make the building safe and compensation.
Yeah.
This is going to be one of the biggest payouts since the American Environmental Protection.
I think the concern that I have is because of the phasing of when the Section 20 notices will land for this remediation work, when the Building Safety Fund pays out, when the Building Safety Bill and Fire Safety Bills go through Parliament, will all predate the Module 6 Grenfell inquiry and the final report. So we just have another delay to the Grenfell inquiry on top of the further delays. So if I would be surprised if we hear Module 6 evidence in 2021. I think it's probably now 2022. And bearing in mind the FSB and the BSB are due to have both gone through Parliament within 2021, I think a lot of the context that we kind of know that will come through that inquiry in a formal evidential way will come too late.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's by luck or by design for the government, I don't know. But I think it's okay to know that various ministers or ex-ministers are going to be called to give evidence. But if they haven't given the evidence, they haven't had that cross-examination by that point. I think a lot of people that aren't as intimately involved in all of this as maybe we are won't consider that in their appraisal of Amendment 13 to the Fire Safety Bill or Building Safety Charge in the Building Safety Bill and all those sorts of things. It will just be kind of the conclusion we all knew was coming, but maybe too late.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real fear from people that I'm talking to, that they kind of think that's going to happen.
We're going to have I mean, I'm dyslexic and I'm very open about being dyslexic. We use a good term called word blind. Okay, we're blind to the words before us. Or selective memory is another one that's in common knowledge. So we don't have that kind of focal point that we've had with Grenfell and all the other shocks and stressors on the new legislation. Everybody's reading it and going, well, that looks just about there, but I'm not happy with these particular clauses, depending on what stakeholder group you're in.
Yeah.
We've also seen too much of industry in its knee-jerk reaction to the Hackett Review. Yeah, we'll adopt a Hackett Review, not realising the consequence of that in terms of resources, cost, administrative and regulatory building. And it's going to all come back and it's all going to go terribly, terribly wrong when it's all introduced. And that's the fear. We're creating we're creating Frankenstein's monster just now between the Hackett Review, the Grenfell inquiry, and this new legislation being forced through. And the new legislation is being forced through because government needs to be seen to be doing something. And it also becomes a defence for the government through the parliamentary process, through select committees, response to the opposition, and response to the Grenfell inquiry. Don't make any qualms about this as part of their contingency response in their legal defence. We spent 1.6 billion. We did this. We did a task group. We put together a protection board. We let industry drive its own solution. We introduced new legislation. We introduced new guidance. And then we're going to have the Grenfell inquiry land, which the government may or may not adopt, as it did with phase one. And then we're going to have the bedding in period, and then we're going to have a test period. Well, unfortunately, in my mind, they are still tinkering. When we moved in 1997 to adopt the European Framework Workplace Directives of 1989 under the Fire Precautions Workplace Regs, we moved from fire brigade and fire authority certification of buildings as safe. We have then went through this social experiment of self-regulation and risk assessment. Now we're going to tinker with it again and include the externals that was missed off, include residentials, include fire safety information and some other bits in the fire safety bill. And then we're going to move under building safety, a building safety case. So we come, which will be self-assessed and certified, probably by licensed professionals, for then approval by the fire authority. So the government's been very slick. It's moved the onus from the inspection enforcement agencies onto the designers, owners, and operators of those buildings. But then there's a check and balance. So if you're following me, the government shifted the focal point and responsibility to ensure that building's safe. But why is government and the fire authorities in such bad shape when they've been responsible for collating building safety information since 1947? So there's a whole load of things still to be teased out. Now, the fire service has been done and dusted in phase one, but nobody's mentioned this community safety and building safety information yet. Is that coming in module 6? What is coming in module 6? What is the focal point? What's the outcome of that when we've then already introduced new legislation? So it's a bit chicken and egg. It would have been better to say, look, the building safety bill and the fire safety bill, let's deal with the gaps under the current legislation. Then, in the next 3 to 5 years, start gearing up the actual legislation under the Hackett Review, under raising the bar, under setting the bar, under the industry response, under testing and trialling everything, and incorporation of the Grenfell inquiry.
Yeah.
So no matter how they cut it, we've got a two-phase process. And the government hasn't overcommitted because it's only looking at residential high-rise over 18 metre. But we know from the Scottish Hospital Inquiry and my own work on UK hospitals, we've got a major problem with hospitals. We've got a major problem with schools. We've got a major problem with offices. We've got major problems with commercial and industrial premises. We've got a major problems with office premises. Nothing is clean here. But we're only looking at this group, and then we're going to phase it out, and we're going to think it out. Well, what's the government's time frame? 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 25? In 2005, when the fire safety order came out, it was the biggest reform of fire safety legislation since the 1970s. 15 years later, it's the biggest review of fire safety legislation in 40 years. You know, it's ridiculous. And if we look at people like Sam Webb, who've been working on the likes of the Ronan Point disaster and safety failings in large panel high-rise buildings for 50 years, and we look at the press from that time in 1969, the government's response is the same. It's not changed. They aren't funding all the remediation. It's a free-for-all about legislation and adoption. There's a political flurry back and forward about they said, we said, she said. I think the only thing that Theresa May picked out from me was when I said this is a decades-old issue that crosses all political parties. Put your house in order, all of you. and stop this theatre in government. I see it. You're on opposing sides, but you're in the playground and you're all friends at the end of the day. Get over it and sort this catastrophe out. Okay.